once again to discuss things.
Hi everyone, welcome to a very spooky episode of Ghouly Gentlemen. No, it's really not. Welcome to our Halloween special. We've been doing horror movie discussion reviews all month on Geeky Gentlemen because horror month is really good for that, because there are a lot of good horror movies that are worth talking about. There are a lot of bad horror movies that are worth talking about, and there's only so much you can talk about around discussions of horror. So we save one discussion topic for Halloween Day. This is the second episode of Geeky Gentlemen uploaded today, so I hope you enjoy this. I hope you just plan your Halloween around listening to a podcast.
Especially because it's Tuesday. Like, damn. What is your life that you can just do this on a Tuesday?
I know. And that's the real horror. That's what this episode's really about. What the fuck is your life that you listen to this garbage show?
On a Tuesday.
On a Tuesday.
Like Saturday night, fine. You have a boring life. But Tuesday? The hell is up with you?
Damn, this just got dark. Anyway, so what is our actual discussion topic, Steve?
Alright, so we are talking about the idea of whether or not horror films need to be scary. Particularly when you put it into context of, like, there are a lot of good classic horror movies that don't, at least for me, don't scare me. Like, sitting down and watching, say, The Shining, I'm not ever afraid of that movie, but it's still a horror movie, and it's a really good horror movie, versus something like The Conjuring, which is a really bad movie. It's a horror movie, but it's really bad, and it's scary. And then there's lots of in-between grounds where, like, is it a psychological thriller or is it a horror movie? I think Get Out fits in that category of, I don't know whether or not to call it a horror movie. So just in that general vein of, like, what is it to be a horror movie?
Gotcha. Okay. Let's just go round robin real quick here and answer yes or no without any nuance or context, just to get an idea of where people are generally at. Feel free to change your answer throughout the episode. So, Steve, does a horror movie have to be scary?
Yes.
Rasco?
No.
I'm also going to go with no. We talked about American Psycho, and I think American Psycho is a horror movie on some level. It's a lot of things, but a horror movie is one of them. And I'm now at no point afraid of American Psycho, but I am horrified by American Psycho. The ideas presented in that movie are horrifying. Same with The Shining. I'm not like, oh no, he's chasing Danny with the axe. That's scary. Like, there's a couple jump scares or whatever. There's a couple, like, shocking moments. But, like, what horrifies me about The Shining are the ideas presented in it. I think this is the major difference for me, is that scary shocks you, horror disturbs you and stays with you.
See, and despite us saying two different things, I feel like we have exactly the same reasoning. It just so happens that I think my definition of horror is broader than that. So when I say a horror movie has to scare you, I mean in the sense that, like, to be a horror movie, it has to have horror in it. Whether that means you being afraid or you being confronted with something that is scary. And that could be as literal as a fucking murderer with a chainsaw walking down the hallway, or it could be as minute as, look out your window, this is the world you live in, kind of thing. And this is why I find it difficult to, like, classify what is and is not a horror movie, because Get Out, which came out this year, is probably one of the best movies of the year. It's like my number 3, probably. That was pitched as a horror movie, that was advertised as a horror movie, that was advertised very poorly, I think, as like a almost like horror movie Truman Show thing where like, oh, it almost looks like a small town murder cult kind of thing. And it's not that at all. And watching it, I think there are lots of things, lots of ideas, lots of really clear themes that are, look at how horrific or how scary this is, but at no point are you afraid of what's happening in the context of the movie. I don't know how much sense that makes, but like this is the problem with like just drawing genre lines in general of like, there are a lot of movies that scare me, but only so many of them can we count as horror movies.
I think that it has to do with what the characters in the story are feeling and the ways in which they're being challenged and growing. Because I think that if you're watching a movie where characters are constantly horrified, it's hard not to call that a horror movie despite it not necessarily scaring you as a viewer.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. I think that's particularly interesting in relation to like how the characters are able to react to these things and whether or not they grow. Because I think so many times in horror movies, the arc is extremely short in that the people are a particular type and their beat is the horror of the story. But rarely, if ever, do they get a resolution to that. And I think that might just be a structural consistency in horror. The people getting chased in Halloween don't ever change. They just get chased, and then the three beats become two.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like, I feel like this is a question that a lot of people who not only watch horror but make horror don't really think about.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like people that make horror movies that are, like, meant to stick with you do so without really any intent to whether or not a movie is scary. Like, are there scary scenes in Silence of the Lambs? Yes. Is that a scary movie? No. I mean, I don't feel, like, particularly frightened during Silence of the Lambs. Like, maybe the night vision scene with Buffalo Bill. But, like, God, Hannibal Lecter sticks with you. The things he says, the way he acts, there's something really, really disturbing about it. And it just unnerves you. It's this creepy notion that someone who is so monstrous can be so smart and have such insight is really creepy because it's like they're in your brain, right?
Yeah.
And that is unsettling. That sticks with you. I think there's also something a lot more primal about being scared, and there's something a lot more modern about being horrified.
Mm-hmm.
I could see that, yeah.
Yeah, and I think almost a better way... Okay, so I think that the word creepy is really useful in determining, like, it's an important word because I think that The Conjuring is not a creepy movie, it's like a scary movie. The Shining is a really creepy movie. And I think that why I enjoy things that are creepy is because creepy kind of comes from there not being something that's obviously wrong. So, like, I don't think that, like, clowns are scary. I think clowns are creepy because there's nothing inherently wrong with a clown. There's nothing inherently scary about it, but there's the possibility of something under the surface. It's the same thing like with masks. When people wear masks, they're creepy just inherently because you have no idea what's under the mask, what the intention of the mask wearer is, or any of that. It's just creepy. And I think that movies that are more horrifying are horrifying because of a bunch of small things that are kind of like hidden truths about reality that are creepy. And when enough of those build up, it's horrifying to think about all of these different small things that individually bother you, but not enough to push you over the edge. But when they build up, that's when something becomes horrifying. And that's literally The Shining to a T. It's a million creepy small things that stick with you. And then that just collectively builds on itself. Whereas scary can come and go in one scene with no build-up except with that scene.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think particularly in like that distinction between scary and creepy, there's a level of like modern horror rests on anxiety in a way that older horror doesn't seem to. Where anxiety isn't a one-time reaction. It's a state of being for a while. And modern horror movies, particularly with jump scares, like to build up anxiety and then let it rip by the end. But the jump scare isn't the thing that matters in those sort of situations, like something like It Follows. It's the constant, like the music for that movie is literally called Heels. It's always on your heel. And particularly in relation, like whether or not you find something actually scary, whether or not watching It Follows gives you a I need to look away reaction, it always gives you some kind of anxiety or you're just not watching it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like It Follows, we talked about, it's not only the creepy sex monster that like appears out of the shadows of the room or whatever. The creepy thing about It Follows is the way in which it shoots things and makes them, makes the ordinary disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
It Follows shoots all of its sex scenes except for the very first one in a very particular way that just makes you, as you're watching it, like feel disgusted by sex. You look at it just like it's gross. It frames it weird. It frames it with such like dispassionate, creepy eeriness, and you're just like, ugh, this is wrong. And people do this all the time, and like I do this, and I enjoy it when I do this. But this, like, just looking at it from a purveyor style like this, it's so creepy. And like that unsettles you. Like my bet for people is, okay, watch It Follows on a first date and try to get laid after.
Yeah,
you cannot do it.
And again, one of the things about It Follows that's just creepy, and it's kind of like an idea. It's not on the screen, but it's that what is it? The thing that follows you. What is it doing right now? Oh, it's following me. It's coming for me right now. What's it doing, an hour later? It's still coming for me right now. And what's it doing an hour after that? It's still following me. It's constantly only doing one thing. It's coming after you. That's an idea that you establish, and then it's there throughout the entire movie. There's never a moment after it's on your tail where it's not literally after you. Like, it is always just following you. And those kind of ideas are so much more powerful and creepy and stick with you than like just having a scene that scared you because something happened on screen.
And I think what both of you have almost alluded to is that, like, with a horror movie in particular, the structure is the structure is the thing that is the story. It's the thing that never goes away. Where like movies have inciting incidents, and then the story unfolds because of the inciting incident. With horror movies, it seems like the inciting incident is the movie. Where like you go to Camp Crystal Lake, that is your inciting incident. Now the entire movie is you went to Camp Crystal Lake. It Follows is you had sex. Now the entire movie is you had sex. The very foundation of why the movie is happening is why the movie never stops happening until it's over.
Mm-hmm. I know what you did last summer. The inciting incident is that I know what you did last summer.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, in its own comedic way, exactly. And I mean, I think maybe even this is a helpful way to, like, because even if it's a bad horror movie, it's still a horror movie. But I feel like saying it something in like those terms helps us better understand like why there are good horror movies and why there are bad horror movies. Like, in particular with like the sort of like meaninglessness of certain hauntings, like The Conjuring, or even sort of like the lack of motivation.
Can you pick a different movie for an example? Just
yeah. Let me think of a dumber horror movie. Okay. Jason Goes to Hell. Like,
oh my god,
that is like the greatest movie ever, but that's okay. But like, so like the dumbness of Jason Goes to Hell. Part of what makes those, and particularly slasher movies, not work as the franchises go on is that the thing that is scary, the incitingness of you go and you've tempted Jason or you've tempted Michael or you've tempted Freddy, that's no longer what's happening. And suddenly the thing that is scary has become too far removed from what's happening within the story of the piece. Freddy vs. Jason's a bad movie, but it's an entertaining movie because it's always Freddy versus Jason. Like, it never gets distracted from the fact that it's Freddy versus Jason. In contrast, a lot of horror movies, particularly when they try to like focus too much on the mythology or they focus too much on the rationalizations, like the Saw franchise, they remove themselves. They remove themselves from like what is supposed to be the reason for the horror, which is that sort of prolonged exposure to being afraid. We watch horror movies whether we want to or not, be scared on some level. And the movie knows that, and we know that. In a way, movies that are scary but are not horror don't.
Okay, let's actually use this to create an interesting distinction here, because by the definition I feel we've been working on, particularly with the inciting incident, is the movie. What is then the difference between a horror movie and a suspense movie? And I guess the example I'm going to go to here, since I know you and I both like this movie, Steve, is Rope, by that definition, a horror movie?
Rope's a really good example. Hitchcock in general, when he doesn't do horror, is a really good example.
Because like
the first half of Psycho.
Psycho isn't really a horror movie for the majority of it. It's just a Hitchcock suspense movie. Rope, like, there's a lot of stuff that sticks with you, and there's a horrifying idea there that someone would just commit a murder for the intellectual thrill of it. I think that's like more particularly horrifying to people that have been in philosophy and ethics classes, because you've had that conversation in a class where like you're talking about free will and someone says you would never kill someone, and you've been like, I could kill you right now, and like intellectually sure, but like no, the whole point they're making is no, you couldn't, because you would never do that.
Yeah.
Well, what if someone fucking did?
Yeah.
What if someone murdered somebody for the intellectual point of it? Shit.
I think there's just an intent's a fuzzy thing. We don't have to get into intent because that's its own video. But I think with horror movies in particular, I think all art has different specifications on how the art's demanding the audience engage with it, and how the audience is demanding the art engage with it. And I think with horror movies in particular, like I said earlier, I think it's a horror movie insofar as the person who's watching it wants to be scared, and the movie knows the audience is there to be scared. I don't think Rope or most suspense movies build on the notion of they are designing themselves because they know the audience wants this. Mm-hmm. And the monkey wrench in that is obviously, to use another Hitchcock example, like we said earlier, is Psycho, where Psycho is not a horror movie until like an hour in.
Yeah, it becomes a horror movie.
But then the counter to that is obviously just we don't live in the world where Hitchcock didn't lock the theater doors after the movie started anymore, so that doesn't count now.
Wait, what? I've never heard this story.
Well, so because Hitchcock designed that movie, and after the movie started playing, no one was allowed to go into the theater because he wanted it to make sure that everyone that saw that movie for the first 40 minutes did not know it was a horror movie. No one knew it was a horror movie until they walked out.
Oh, interesting.
Huh. Yeah, so I mean, in that, for that context, that ruins my argument. But for the present context, because everyone now accepts Psycho as a horror movie, that doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting.
I think that I because like a second ago when you asked like the difference between horror and suspense, I was like trying to rack my brain for the most like quintessential movie that almost crosses the line into horror but is not. I think is like firmly a suspense thriller. Have you guys ever heard of the movie The Perfect Getaway?
No.
No.
I think that's what it's called. It's got Mila Jovovich and the guy. He's from Daddy Daycare. And he's like the dad in Diary of a Wimpy Kid. forget. And he was the ape. He was a bad ape in Planet of the Apes.
That doesn't help.
His name's like Steve Zahn or something like that, I think. But that is a movie about this couple that are on a honeymoon after their wedding, and they go to like Hawaii or something. And while they're there, they hear news that there's like these two murderers that are married on the loose on that island that they are on. And they meet a few people while they're out like adventuring the wilderness of Hawaii. And like there's all of this suspense built up, like are these the murderers? Like are these not the murderers? Yada yada yada. And it is a scary movie in some sense because like the very idea that you could be hanging out with someone and they could be a murderer or not, that is scary. But it's not a horror movie. And I think that the difference is that like suspense is something, and you mentioned a little bit earlier, Ian, that like you're talking about how like there's kind of like this more like primal fear, and then there's like a different kind of fear. And I think that suspense is more of like a thing that's preying on your fight or flight reflex, like as an organism. And horror is more of like playing with fears that are created like out of the really human personality, psychological component of your brain and your psyche. Like horror isn't
definitely
primal.
because like
it's more so like in a society things create horror, and certain like for example, you might think that like darkness and the moon and nighttime is scary, and it kind of feels like we've gotten away from the primal part of that, and it's more something psychological about like darkness and what your fears and like what's in the dark and that unknown, and it is a little bit less about that fight or flight reflex. And that's I think kind of the difference.
Yeah, definitely, because like when you think of jump scares in horror movies done well or not, like we've all had that experience where someone did something that you just were not prepared for at all. Like I remember the other day, Haley and I were out on a walk through our neighborhood, and we were almost back to the apartment, and just we're walking on the sidewalk in front of where people park their cars, and I didn't see that there was a person in their car. I didn't know anything about it. And as we were walking in front of the car just starts up. Holy shit, I jumped. You know, you've all had that moment of like someone surprised you and you jumped. And like that's the thing is like anytime you do that in a movie, you're like, people go, you got scared. I'm like, I got surprised. I am not scared by this. I was surprised by this. Mm-hmm. And like that is very primal. That is like, you know, this is overly simplistic. That is tracking through the jungle and hearing a growl behind your ear.
Yeah.
Like that's like that hair raises on the back of your neck kind of type of fear. Horror is this fear that there's someone just waiting behind the corner, waiting to get to you. And there's this point that Milan used to make, fuck him now, but he was a cool dude at one point. There's this point that Milan used to make that I really, really liked, which is what killed the vampire, knowing how to kill the vampire. Like, the whole point of what made monsters scary was you didn't know what to... You had no idea how to deal with them. They were just something out there wanting nothing but to kill you, and you had no way to deal with that. It was this huge existential threat. But now that you have like garlic and a crucifix and stuff, now it's a manageable threat. Now it's not horrifying anymore. Now it's a manageable risk. And so horror is this other thing, this like uncontrollable thing that is outside of yourself and lingers in a fascinating way.
You know, and this is a little bit tangential, but now that you say that quote, because we've talked about that before of like what killed the vampire, knowing how to kill the vampire, but like when did we ever not know how to kill the vampire?
Well, no, that's just the go-to example. Like there used to be this idea of just monsters out there, and there was no way to beat them. That they're just a monster.
But like, was there? I feel like the very idea of creating a monster necessitated a sort of like, well, how do you get away from the monster idea, which is how you kept people in line. Like,
Steve, how do you kill the boogeyman?
Well, you kill the boogeyman by being a good kid that goes to bed on time. Like, you are afraid of demons, be a good Christian. Like I feel like How to Kill a Demon is always in line with how they exist in the first place. You know, like I don't know if it's necessarily like that kind of mystery of how to stop them, as opposed to you can't. You know, like How to Kill a Vampire is stab him in the heart with a stick. Sure, good luck trying to do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's a fair point. I don't know, I find that idea really, really interesting, that, like, the society created the monster to just, to just give you something to be afraid of. Steve and I, breaking the illusion here, we recorded our upcoming character discussion on a character in Greek mythology, and there's the classic story in Greek mythology of Persephone is walking through the fields picking flowers when Hades rose up out of the ground and kidnapped her away to be his wife. That's a moral tale that is, like, quite useful for, little girls living in times where, people would actually just come up and steal a child. That is a really useful tale to instill the fear in them not to do that, not to go out in the field alone, that kind of thing. And so what is the solution for defeating Hades in that? There is none. It is just this tale to instill fear. It is this tale to instill horror for a very specific purpose. So yeah, the solution is don't go out in the fields and that won't happen to you. But that doesn't do anything for you, for just that fear of, if you go out into the fields, this will happen to you.
Yeah.
So, like, you're right. There are a lot of things, like, where, yes, there is an easy solution to it. Yes, there might be, but there were tales where it's just, there is no solution. It's just, this is a certainty, so don't do it. Hansel and Gretel go through the woods. Is there even a version of that story where the witch doesn't eat them?
Kids versions, but yeah.
Yeah. And that's modern children's versions, because the point of that tale was to horrify children into going into the woods alone, because there's a good chance they get lost, there's a good chance they hurt themselves, there's a good chance their parents are never able to find them, even if they go looking.
Yeah, kids are, like, wired to believe things that you say because they need to. Like, if you tell your kid, like, don't go over too deep in the water, there's sharks out there, if that was true, they'd need to believe you, so it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's interesting to see how people manipulate that shit. Like, you ever met the kid who's, like, afraid of or not even met the kid. Have you ever realized as an adult that you were afraid of a very specific, or you believed a very specific thing that wasn't true because it made raising you easier for your parent for, like, that 1 second?
I'm sure there's got to be something.
I don't, like, I know I'm reaching. I'm trying to remember something. Like, I'm sure there is, like, a specific example where I'm like, God, I'm an idiot.
Yeah, for like that. I mean, I guess the whole don't make that face or you'll freeze that way thing.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, the classic example is this. Hey, guys, guess what? I don't have arthritis.
Oh, yeah.
True.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
Fuck that.
That is literally, yeah, that pisses me off.
Fuck that so much.
God.
It's just air pockets. You could have just told me.
Yeah, but no, the reason they don't want you doing that is because it annoys them. So they just want, like, it annoys my wife. She got up and left the room. And now everyone's popping their knuckles on recording. People are listening to this popping their knuckles right now. I guarantee it. No, it's that thing of, like, people get annoyed by that specific thing, so they tell a lie mainly to children, and people believe it. And of course you believe it because your mom said so. And then there's that one day when the veil is fucking lifted. And you're like, oh, like, there's that day where you realize your parents don't know everything. and you're like, oh my fucking god.
You liars.
But to relate this back to horror, okay, actually, this is an interesting example. One theme that I find in a lot of horror movies to be particularly interesting is the idea of, like, the evil parent. And that's something that always, like, sticks with you. Like, even when things aren't horror, like, as a genre, a lot of things will use tropes that are based in horrific ideas for, like, setting up their villains or whatever. A lot of Disney stuff, it's like the evil stepmother. Like if you watch Cinderella, the stepmother and Lucifer, her fucking cat, are horrifying. Like, the way she's drawn and framed and things, like, Cinderella's like, oh, I'm gonna go out to the market, and she's like, no, you're not. And she's just, like, sitting in the bed, and there's, like, the drapes and the shadows, and it's like, the fear of the parent is an interesting horror theme that's used in a lot of things.
And I mean, in the most general sense, like how the parent represents a sort of power over the other person, and the deficiency of power is what's really scary there. But no, I see what you're saying. I think because we're talking about horror, we're necessarily having conversations about what it means for anything to be part of any genre. And a point I made in my video on Logan is that genres exist as modes of systemization, and so a genre and what counts as part of that genre works in part, at least, only insofar as how you need that genre to work. So the genre of horror is, at least on some level, a function of how you want to interpret things that are scary. And so you classify them as all being horror. And so the idea that horror movies share common themes exists because you want to interpret certain movies in similar ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing, is like the answer to the question of this video, does a horror movie have to be scary, is, well, if you want it to be.
Yeah.
I
posted a tweet about this earlier where I'm like, is a tree merely a tree? Only if you want it to be.
Mm-hmm. And so it's like, it's all about how you define things, how you approach things. You can find, like, any movie, like, you could find any film or whatever to be horror if you are scared by it. Like, you could watch the latest Taylor Swift music video and be screaming by the end of that. What's that movie with George Clooney and Kevin Spacey?
Sounds bad already.
Wow, damn.
I'm kidding. I love Kevin Spacey.
Men Who Stare at Goats.
Oh,
that has, like, this really interesting thing where apparently the army is using like psychological torture on Gitmo prisoners by, like, playing Barney music 24/7, and, like, yeah, that would become horrifying. You can imagine how that's horrifying, but that does not in and of itself make Barney music horrifying.
Yeah.
Well, maybe, but, you know, probably a better example out there, but that's the one that came to mind.
But, like, it's contextual, right? Like, what is scary exists insofar in a society that has certain values for what is scary and what isn't scary. Like, what a horror movie is now in a very particular way is different than what a horror movie used to be. I feel like something like, say, Psycho, which I think is a classic horror movie, one of the best horror movies, you play that for a modern audience and they don't get it the way that we do now. It's partly because society evolves, things that are scary evolve. The idea that this person becomes...
What it influenced is, you know, scarier or more horrific than it was, so you need the context of it, yada yada.
Yeah, and I mean, part of it's like the way in which, like, that person becomes consumed by their parent is not the way in which people experience being consumed by their parent now. And so whether or not it's still a horror movie is an interesting question, where I feel like I don't think it was a debate when it came out as to whether or not it was. And I think it's entirely possible for movies to pass through genres depending on what period you're talking about them in. Like, Hamlet's a really good classical example of, like, what that play is about really depends on who you're talking to in what context. Because classically, Hamlet's a story about a person that is paralyzed by indecision. But, like, later in late Nietzsche writings, he's like, it's a story about a person that's paralyzed by too many decisions. And then, like, later in the 1900s, Adorno's like, it's a story that's about a person that doesn't know how to make a decision. Like, there's the way in which a thing is interpreted is always going to rest on the society under which you can form an interpretation. And so if we're talking about what is a horror movie and we're talking about what is scary has to always change. And I feel like, in a way, Saw and, like, the whole torture porn genre existed in the mid-2000s doesn't survive the way it used to is because torture porn isn't scary anymore. At least not in the way, like, sex monsters are. I guess that's our new standard, is sex monsters, because there are so many movies about that.
Could you make an It Follows porn parody?
Why would you want to?
Wouldn't it, or would it just break the cycle of, would it just break the message to the point of not even knowing what the movie's about anymore?
Like, well, what would that be? I don't understand.
Just a quick thing on Saw and why I think that was, like, a thing for so long. Torture porn just, like, really just ramped up in its relevance. Is it, like, I think that there are certain things that just can, like, there are certain kind of naive aspects of humanity that, like, once that naivete is removed, you can't go back. And so, like, torture porn is one of those things where you see for so long, there are just certain things that you just don't ever expect to actually see. Like, you never expect to see someone's mouth opened in reverse from a bear trap. You don't even know what that would look like if it happened, because that's not what happens. Even in some of the goriest movies that ever exist, you don't see that kind of stuff. It's beyond your imagination, like, how mutilated a human body can be. And once you've seen it, you've seen it. And now we live in a world where those movies exist. We know what it looks like when your head's opened with a bear trap. We're almost numb to the idea.
Yeah, we have an idea of what it would look like now. So now you can turn away, whereas before it was impossible to turn away.
Yeah, you can't kill an idea.
Yeah. And see, torture porn movies, like, you know, even when they were coming out and when they were in their heyday, they were out there welcome fast among critics.
Yeah.
Like, Saw got pretty popular. Hostile was pretty popular. Saw 2 got a pass for a surprisingly well done story. After that, Hostel 2, all the Saw movies, just everything else that jumped on that gore bandwagon went right down the fucking drain, and just no one was praising it. No one liked it. It was just one of those things where, like, general audience would go watch it. But, like, I never accept general audiences liked it. General audiences will watch anything. Literally anything. Why do you think fucking, I don't know, who's an actor I can make fun of? Why do you think some random actor has a career?
Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise has a career.
It's true. Fuck Tom Cruise. But,
yeah.
No, I agree. And I think that's particularly interesting in, like, when we try to recapture things that were popular at a particular point in history, because the first couple Friday the 13th, Nightmare, Halloween, Hellraiser even movies were pretty popular, and then the sequels were all panned. And every remake for all of those movies that came out in the mid to late 2000s were all panned. Because what was scary about Halloween or Freddy Krueger or Jason was no longer scary in the same way. And so to just do that monster again wasn't good enough.
Yeah, like, have you guys been to summer camp?
No.
How many kids go to... I went to summer camp, and it was horrifying. But how many people today go to summer camp?
Yeah, honestly. Like, how many people go to summer camp to the point where Camp Crystal Lake is scary? But then also, in a world after things like Inception, And after the metafiction of stuff like Scream, what about Freddy Krueger is scary in the same way?
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that it's not a good idea. It's just the kind of horror it was is not the horror it can be now. Because, like, horror is supposed to, like all art, reflect something about a social anxiety. And the kind of horror movies we used to make about, like, these monsters invading our homes is a different kind of thing than what we do now, which is the monster is our home, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and there are certain things that are, like, tied to time, like, that are good because of the time that they were made. And this is different from me saying that, like, well, it was good for the time. I'm saying that there are things that are good because of when they're made. So, for example, the light bulb was great when it was made because, yay, now we have light bulbs. We can use them. We can light things, yada, yada, yada. But if you invented, like, today, a blender that doubles as a cell phone, like, that's not a good invention right now. That maybe would have been useful, like, 20 years ago. That would have gotten us somewhere. But it's not useful today. It's not, like, it just wouldn't work. We're past it. And if you come up with a cell phone blender in 30 years, it's even going to be worse. Like, there's a time when an invention can come into existence and be useful and be good, and it works with certain ideas in movies as well.
Can someone please draw me a cell phone blender?
Yes. It's gotta be really dangerous to put something that's, like, meant to blend things up to your head to talk to people.
Because that is, like, possibly the best invention ever created for Geeky Gentlemen right there. That is up there, man. I really want to see this. Yeah, I want to see the cell phone blender. Like, the Will It Blend guy on YouTube is going to have a field day. Can you blend the cell phone blender?
Like, if you invented some sort of thing that, like, it's some sort of product that makes sure your VHS tapes don't ever, like, degrade or something, it wouldn't be as good as an invention today. Like, that's an invention we needed 30 years ago. See,
that's a really good example, because that just made me think of The Ring. VHS tape. Like, what is the Ring monster in the era of streaming?
Yeah.
And that's partly why I wish It Follows was even a better movie of, like, what's an internet haunting? Is the internet scary in a movie monster way?
Unfriended? You mean Unfriended?
Yeah, Unfriended, sorry.
Yeah, you said It Follows.
Sorry, yeah. I just keep thinking of that movie because I haven't seen it in a while. But yeah, like Unfriended, like what is scary about the internet in a way that is scary about something like The Ring? Or like, I think Ultron's scary, but, like, not because I think he's going to come out from under my bed and slaughter me.
Now, what if Ultron started crawling out from under your bed in the James Spader voice, and he's like, I've got no strings.
I would love it. Bedrooms. You don't understand. I have a bizarre obsession with Ultron. Like, it is disturbing. Don't worry about that. But like, yeah, it's that thing of, like, there are things now that are evolutions of what were scary, but those evolutions are not in themselves scary. So, like, if The Ring can't become streaming, there has to be something else about the streamingness that is scary. So, like, it's not that streaming is scary. It's that now that we have the internet, what's scary is not having it. You know?
7 days.
Yeah.
You're gonna kill me in 7 days? No, I'm going to cut your internet connection in 7 days.
The free trial is over.
You have 7 days to find a new provider. My Ring voice is dangerously close to my Palpatine voice.
Okay.
Oh, man. I bet you the Empire provides terrible internet service.
I think, because Raska, you showed this to me at one point, right? Hush. I think Hush is a really good example of, like...
Oh, yeah.
Because I think Hush is a pretty good movie. It's got problems here and there. It's not, like, terrifying or anything. But Hush is a really good example of, like, you could almost interpret that movie in a really contemporary political sense. And, like, it's a really good metaphor for what is scary right now. About, like, lone woman, she's deaf. The guy's a white hunter dude who does nothing but slaughter people for the fun of it. in a house that's entirely too big for her, out in the middle of nowhere where she has no communication. Like it's a really specific metaphor almost, and it doesn't even have to be. But like that's scary on a base level of being hunted, but it's also very contemporary, and it's not something that we would have made 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Are movie monsters scary anymore?
Like what do you mean movie monsters?
Like is Dracula scary anymore? Like is Dracula scary, or do you have to do something to make Dracula scary? Is Frankenstein scary?
I don't know, like when was the last time someone tried to make a scary Dracula movie?
Can they? I wonder if the reason they haven't is because I don't know if they can.
Oh, have you guys seen the movie The Descent?
Yes.
The cave monsters in that scare the shit out of me.
I mean, that's fair. The sequels are hilarious. I love the sequels.
Yeah, they are hilarious. But the first Descent movie, like that's some scary stuff. That's a horrifying movie, actually.
Yeah.
But trying to think, like,
yeah, I guess another distinction is scary is more about things, horror is more about ideas. Because like there's very few ideas that are just like scary to think about. Like, I mean, I'm sure, like, what if your whole family died? Well, I don't want to think about that. That's more depressing to think about than scary to think about. But like, what's something that's horrifying to think about? Oh, I don't know. Just what if this very particular thing was happening?
Okay, here's
and
like,
I have no control over it.
A family member is flying across the country, and you flip on the news and you hear that there was a plane crash. That's like an idea that's scary. But there's nothing like literally happening to you in that moment that's scary. Like you're not in danger yourself, but there's like this ambiguity of what'd you say?
Like the uncertainty of it. Where like the plane crashed, you know they're on there, you don't know if they're dead though.
Or you don't even know if it was their plane.
Yeah.
You know, there's this interesting story I remember. Is this guy talking about his husband, and like he was making dinner. His husband was late coming home from dinner, so he's sitting there, and for like the first 5 minutes, he's like, "Oh, great, he's probably running behind and didn't think to tell me." Then 10 minutes, I probably got pulled over by the cops or something. 15 minutes. He's in a ditch. He's dead. He's in a ditch. He's lying in a ditch, screaming for help, and no one's stopping. 20 minutes. He is dead in that ditch. He is not moving anymore. No one stopped. It's all over. 25 minutes, the door opens, and he looks at his husband and goes, "I die every time I kill you." And so that's like a very particular thing. Like there are these dynamics in relationships where there's the person that worries and then there's the person who doesn't think to call. And now ask yourself, not only you two, people listening, which one are you? And do you feel bad? But like, yeah, there's these very particular dynamics in relationships, and you're like, of like literally imagining these terrible things happening to your loved ones just because of something normal. Like, you have been late to places at some point in your life, and you never at any point considered that they are like worried that you are dead in a ditch somewhere. But you have probably also been on the other side of that, of like someone has just dropped off and you don't know what happened to them, and your mind goes to like literally the darkest possible place in the world.
Yeah, I mean, there were so many times where my phone was on silent, and I turned it on an hour later, and there was like 17 missed calls from my mom. Like, where were you?
That'll do it. So yeah, like that's a really good example of how like there's ideas of what could happen are horrifying because you're sitting there dwelling on it, whereas like there are very few ideas that are just like the same scary of like give you a start.
So on a really simplistic but I think maybe interesting avenue for this is what scares you two, as opposed to horrifies? Because horrifies, like you said, is about ideas and relations and stuff. But like, what scares you?
I mentioned this in the last episode. I do not do well when people describe surgery. I remember I read this book in high school where it like vividly for paragraphs described the process of someone going through anaphylactic shock. And it bothered the hell out. Like, it was worse because I was doing it to myself because I was reading the book. But, dude, I started sweating. I literally felt like I was going to throw up reading this chapter. There's a book by the same guy that did Fight Club. I think it's called Haunted, maybe? The guy has done readings of the first chapter of the book in public places, and people have had to leave the room. And it was that same feeling, but I was doing it to myself. Every detail of it was described in ad nauseum in this book, and I was reading it and doing it to myself, and I felt like just scared to keep going, but like if I didn't finish it, I know that it would just be waiting for me later on.
That's freaky. Yeah.
Yeah, so like I couldn't not finish that chapter. So like, but yeah, like I mean, I hate getting old because all old people want to do is talk about their surgeries, and I hate talking about surgery. It makes me feel queasy. Like, oh my god, you two are laughing, you don't even understand it yet. Like, because I'm an old person because I've had to have surgeries now. And so all they do is, like, whenever I go over to dinner with my mom, to my mom's, and she has friends over, all they do is sit around and talk about, oh yeah, I gotta get this surgery done, or I got this surgery done. I'm like, just fucking stop it. Like, not even just for my sake, it's just rude to discuss, like, physical things on that level. Maybe I'm a Puritan, I don't fucking know, but just quit it. Have some shame in your body. It's disgusting, I promise.
Oh, that was amazing.
So yeah, like, go ahead, Raz.
Okay, so wait, am I answering like...
What is a thing that actually scares you?
Scares me... Okay, can it... Okay. I'm kind of confused now because we've been talking about the difference between like horror and scary and...
Independent of like an idea, like say being alone,
okay,
or like what like regardless of context.
Do you have a phobia?
There you go.
Phobia. I am often very afraid. There's two things that really scare me. One is that I'm just going to one day interact with somebody who just had like their one bad day, and that like they're gonna be like, I'm gonna like go to like Starbucks and like get like a caramel macchiato, and then they're gonna be like, you know what? I fucking hate my life. I'm putting a cyanide capsule in this, and like that I'm gonna be the one guy that just gets fucked because someone else was having a bad day and just broke down. I'm afraid of that. I'm also...
Steve, have you ever put cyanide capsules in anybody's coffee?
Not cyanide, but close.
Spit, yes.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, the other thing that like scares me, and this is kind of crossing into the territory of ideas, but I am horrified of like transhumanism technology and like the world after people start changing themselves, and like when we are more than just what we're born as, but you don't have to be, and like the implications of that. Like, imagine if you lived in a world where people are changing and they're growing and expanding what it means to be a human with all of this technology. But imagine like how many weird problems there would be. Like, what about like certain people of different like religious practices who like don't use technology one day out of the week? Like, I know that that's the case with like Orthodox Jews. I think they like take a day out of the week where they can't use like electricity or something like that. And it's like, or just the Amish. What happens when we live in a world where like people are different? Like, there's like literally you as a human are capable of more than someone else who can't augment themselves or chooses not to. And like, that's the shit that scares me, like the future. And like,
that's my origin story for the Borg. I have like I'm not a huge Star Trek fan or anything, but I have a really good origin story for the Borg, which is like they start off as a relatively like, you know, Puritan society, and then they slowly get more and more technically advanced, and then there's like this really you know, big shock and kind of outrage when someone makes like a cybernetic arm that's in every conceivable way better than a real arm. Mm-hmm. And then like just slowly the entire society like is just goes transhumanism gone wrong to the point where they become the Borg. And like, I don't know how much Star Trek you've watched, but like the Borg are particularly terrifying in that regard, because like when Seven of Nine first gets on Voyager, she decides to like help with repairs to the ship and stuff like that, and she's with Harry Kim and they're repairing a coil, and she goes to grab it with her like just naked hand, and like Harry stops her and goes, "What the hell are you doing?" And she's like, "This cybernetic arm can take heat in excess of 5,000 degrees. This coil is only 4,990 degrees, so I'll be fine." And he's like, no, it's a safety thing. But she just looks at him and goes, "But to use another workaround will be inefficient." And like, so she is part of a society that wholly views themselves as completely disposable. And that is this interesting mix of like repulsively scary thing mixed with horrific idea. So yeah, I agree. Transhumanism kind of freaks me out sometimes.
Yeah, it scares the shit out of me. Like, I'm horrified. What happens when we look so different from what we look like now? Like, what happens to art? Like, do we still make movies where, like, Westerns? Like, for example, like, what if we look robotic? We can't make movies where people don't look robotic unless, I guess by that time we'd have, like, special effects and stuff. But at that point, you're just going way out of your way to make us look different than we did. Like, there's just so many things like that horrify me. Like, I hate the idea that, like, certain art forms will die out because people will just either like not care enough, or like the world will change in a way where they're just not practical, or like they just can't be done anymore. It's a lot of like really petty small stuff, but like that's the stuff that really scares the shit out of me.
How about you, Steve? What's a specific thing that scares you?
There's hyper specific and then there's more vague. So like hyper specific is I've never actually gotten over my weird phobia of Michael Myers because I watched Halloween when I was way too young. So like in the back of my mind, there's always this, I'm gonna look out the corner at my window and there's gonna be a pale white face staring from across the street, and I will fucking kill myself because no.
Oh,
but I think that segues into like the deeper thing, which is like there's that whole like a complete inability to relate to someone physically in front of me. I think is really terrifying. So like if there's just, and I think particularly that Michael Myers color scheme of like pale skin because it's a white mask and black all around. Like if someone like that, whether they're expressionless and just staring at you, or like laughing for no reason, or just like if there's no way for me to communicate to something that clearly has a way to communicate, I am just petrified. I don't know what to do with that. Because like I'm introverted in a lot of ways, but I like talking, and I like to hear myself talk clearly. But like on top of that.
Zing.
But like on top of that, like someone's got to listen, and I have this thing where like the apartment's entirely mine. So like I have my room and there's a living room and a kitchen and all that. Technically speaking, if the living room door is locked and I just keep my door open, that's fine. There's no reason why my door has to be closed when I'm going to bed, because the only door that matters is the living room door. I can't deal with that. In my room, my door is closed, my closet door is closed, my bathroom door is closed, all the doors are closed, everything is sealed off because of this weird off chance of like the darkness turning into something and taking me away. It's
Yeah.
completely irrational. But I think that's part of the point, is that, like, everything that, like, whether it's a person or a physical object or a space or, like, anything that, like, has an ability to relate to me, that loses that ability, whether it's an expressionless person or, like, fading into darkness, that just terrifies me.
Yeah, I have OCD, but like I don't say that like, oh, I organize my pencils. Like I don't have OCD. I'm not like an organized person. Like that's like bullshit when people say like I have OCD, I'm really organized. I have actual OCD, which is like pretty much Tourette's. And it just means that like you do it's the same thing. Like people who have Tourette's, they don't like convulse because their muscles are making them do it. It's because they have like a thing. It's like you have to keep doing this, whatever twitch it is, if you have Tourette's, or else you feel like incomplete. And
Yeah.
so like OCD is the same way, where you get anxiety when you don't perform ritualistic behaviors that your mind just tells you to do. And so like there are a lot of things that like really used to horrify me, and like my OCD's like really gone away a lot over the past like year, but for like all my way through high school, so many things would freak the fuck out of me. Like there's 5 main types of OCD. Like one is like contamination OCD. So that's people that are afraid of like germs or like poisons and that kind of stuff, like being in food and water. And there was a time when I was horrified of that. Like my hands would literally bleed. Like I would wash my hands so much that my knuckles would like be open with blood dripping out of them. Like it was bad. But like that stuff is really scary because you're like literally just being irrational and you know it.
Yeah.
That's what's horrifying about OCD.
Yeah. I mean, like, there's just, particularly with, like, when I tied in something like that Michael Myers fear of, like, there's a very particular type of, like, control I have of, like, my surroundings and my space. So, like, it's not the OCD where everything has to be hyper-organized, but it's the OCD of, like, I have to just know. Like, the doorknob has to be closed in a certain way. My doorknob, my deadbolt on my door is locked. But that doesn't mean that when I turn off light, I'm not going to go to that door and I'm going to, like, touch it 6,000 times to make sure it's locked. And I don't need to do that. But, like, it's this weird hyper-awareness of the space I'm inhabiting. And the moment something is out of place in that, or I can't relate to the space with a person in it, it freaks me the fuck out. I can't deal with that shit. Michael Myers is not scary because he's a dude in a white mask and a black costume. He's scary because he's a dude standing in the middle of fucking nowhere for no fucking reason, just fucking staring at you. And I don't know what to do about that. Stop doing it. It's scary.
So you would have really been bothered by, like, if you saw one of those creepy clowns that were the rage last year then, huh?
Yes. Like, no, fuck that. Fuck that noise.
The best videos are the ones where people like aren't afraid of the clowns and like beat the clowns up.
Honestly, though,
I feel like you kind of deserve that.
Honestly, though, like, that's what I would do. I'd get to that point where, like, if it's just staring at me long enough, I will punch it in the face.
Yeah.
Because, like, I need a reaction.
Yeah.
I think it's technically illegal to wear masks like in public locations like that. Like you can't conceal your identity when you're in public.
Good. Fuck that.
I don't know about that.
I'm pretty sure you can. Like you can't. You're not
that.
supposed to be in a public area and not have ID. Like you're not supposed to be at a mall and not have like a driver's license if you're an adult.
That's surprising.
Yeah, there's a
Well,
lot
that's
of really
surprising.
kind of weird laws like that when you really think about it. But like, yeah, like I'm pretty sure most places it's illegal to like literally be like trying to disguise who you are.
Well, there's specific things, like at banks, where, like, you were not allowed to walk into a bank with, like, a hat and sunglasses.
Well, like, I guess it would depend. Like, if you put on clown makeup, then you're not really concealing yourself. At least not in the way that, like, most women in this country do. So, yeah, that's an interesting point. Okay, so we know what to do to really fuck with Steve's life. There we go.
Yeah. I'm just gonna look out my window. There's gonna be a face there, and I'm gonna, like, fucking shoot it. Because no. Have you guys ever seen Trick or Treat?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So that scene in the beginning of the movie where, like, the woman's taking down the decorations, and she looks at the corner, and there's just a guy standing there, and then, like, he's just staring for, like, 2 minutes, and then a car pulls up, and he's just a teenager waiting for his ride.
Yep.
Like, that scene fucks
Yep.
with me.
Oh, definitely. It's a creepy one.
I love that movie, though.
Then why didn't you pick it, Steve?
I thought we already reviewed that, didn't we?
No, we've never reviewed Trick or Treat.
Oh, damn. Next year.
There's I should say this. You don't have to save horror movie reviews for October. You can pick a horror movie at any point.
No, that's true. We'll see. We'll see what my mood is later. When it's not horror month, it just is less interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, Trick or Treat and Paranorman 2 that I would like to talk about do not fit in any other month but October. Anyway. Well, I feel like we reached some interesting places on this, and I don't feel like anyone changed their opinion. I don't feel like you have to go, to be scared by a horror movie, or to be horrified by a horror movie, let me put it that way. Did anyone change their opinion, or did I misread the room?
Not really.
Yeah, I feel like we're all kind of on the same page as where we were. It's just, this is complicated. And, like, anything you say about, like, what is and isn't a horror movie, you can kind of, like, broaden out to uncomfortable degrees of, like, honestly, if you think about it, are the Death Wish sequels not superhero movies? You know? Like, that kind of thing. Like, what is it about the motifs in and of themselves that necessitate that genre, you know?
Definitely. Yeah, it's an interesting topic. Okay. Well, that's gonna wrap up Horror Month. I hope everyone enjoyed themselves. I hope everyone had a good horror month. Now we're gonna move into Geeky Gentleman History Month. And I'm always excited to talk about Geeky Gentleman History Month. It's not a thing I see many geek channels do, just discuss, like, the historical contexts of different things, and it's a great excuse to just talk politics and art and just all kinds of things. You get all over the place with History Month. So, since we've been doing mostly reviews, we'll start off History Month with a discussion. So, let's see, what's a good thing to discuss? I think I've got it. All right. We're going to do a discussion about how important is it for something that is based on a true story to actually line up with the actual history of that story. So when we got, like, a biopic or a movie or whatever that is based on a true story, how important is it for that thing to actually be, you know, anywhere near accurate with that story? And, you know, there's a lot we can talk about with that. We can talk about inspired by as a distinction from based on, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that'll do it. Everyone, thank you very, very much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
I am the Exile.
And I'm the beta male cock.
And we are your Geeky Gentlemen. And we will be discussing things.
Ah!